Hello and welcome to Rings Check. I'm Barry and we are back with the next part of the Lord of the Rings story as told through the scenarios in Lord of the Rings the card game, published by Fantasy Flight Games and currently getting reprints. So if you've never played through before or you were always curious about how the story related to the quest that you were playing, this may be the video for you. So hopefully you're up to date with where we're at on the rest of the story. The hobbits have just left Tom Bombadil and are heading towards Bree. Let me put on some music and then we will go through the story that the cards tell. So after being set on the path to Bree by Tom Bombadil, our hobbits arrive at the West-gate of Bree in the evening, startling the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper asks them their business, but Frodo tells them basically nunya, as in none your business. And the gatekeeper simply mentions that there's queer folk about and they would not be the only guests at the Prancing Pony. Now, it's fair to assume that the Prancing Pony is the only inn at Bree. The town's described as having 100 big folk houses, though many hobbits are also nearby and around in town. So Frodo wonders if it's Gandalf that's here to meet them and he's one of the strangers that the gatekeeper's talking about. You know, Bree was a backup sort of meeting point for them, but the tone of the gatekeeper makes him think otherwise, so there's currently trouble in Bree. Frodo and his companions arrive at Bree to find the shadow of the Black Riders already on the crossroads town. Unsure of who to trust, they decide to lodge at the Prancing Pony. There they meet a friend of Gandalf named Strider, who offers to lead them to Rivendell, but their movements are also tracked by less savoury folk. Is there anything on the flip side of this? Just a quote from Aragorn there. So they end up at the Prancing Pony, which is a pleasant enough building run by Barliman Butterbur. This is the innkeeper of the establishment. And when he speaks to the hobbits, he feels like there's something he should remember, but, you know, tip of his tongue, something tickling the back of his mind, he can't quite recall what he was supposed to tell them. So the party decide to get rooms and stabling for their ponies, and thankfully, even though the inn is busy with dwarves and travellers, the inn was built with some hobbit-sized rooms that are empty. So the innkeeper then, after sorting them out, invites them to carouse and share news of the Shire as they get so few visitors from there, to which the hobbits agree. So, as they're talking with the local men and hobbits, Frodo sees a weather-beaten stranger in the corner, and that Barliman tells him that that is a ranger. Now, unfortunately, there's no Aragorn allies, or Strider allies, so this Dunedain watcher looks like she's also perhaps keeping an eye out around the bar, so putting her in Aragorn's stead. And to give it that Aragorn feel, I've added Celebrian stone to the deck to represent that Aragorn is also going to be questing with the hobbits and helping the hobbits out for this scenario. So Frodo goes to speak to the man in the corner, so Strider, but as they're talking, Pippin began talking about Bilbo's birthday party, and he was getting near the point that Bilbo disappeared. Worried that people would put the name Baggins together with the ring, he leapt on the table, Frodo leapt on the table and began to sing. And so this was met with great revelry as people loved the song, and they made Frodo sing it again and they joined in. But as Frodo was dancing and leapt in the air, he slipped and fell and then vanished, drawing unwanted attention to himself. So everybody's standing agape at what had just happened. Two of the patrons, a swarthy Breelander and a squint-eyed southerner, slip out together. You know, the pair of them have been talking in hushed tones to each other throughout the night, and these are both spies of the Dark One. Now, I'm a little unclear whether or not the squint-eyed southerner is Bill Ferny or not. I think he is, but I'm not 100% sure. As there's two cards for him in this scenario. And I wasn't 100% sure when I was reading the book, but I'm sure somebody will be able to tell me in the comments. Anyway, when Frodo reappears, Strider admonishes him and says that they would speak more later. And when the ranger comes to speak to the hobbits, he offers to help, but only if he took him with them. The hobbits want to know what he knows, and Strider says, "Too much, too many dark things," grimly, according to the quote there. And he reveals that he's actually been following the hobbits since they were with Tom Bombadil after the Barrow Downs, and that he was looking for Frodo. He also says that the Black Riders are in Bree, and they have friends. So here we speak specifically about Bill Ferny, who is a cad, and will likely sell news of Frodo to the Nazgul hunting them, but Strider can help them get out of Bree and get along to Rivendell. The group are interrupted by Barliman, who remembers the message that he was supposed to pass on to Frodo, and reveals that he has a letter for him that Gandalf asked him to send almost 3 months ago. Gandalf's letter gives them, the hobbits, reassurance that Aragorn is a friend, and Aragorn tells them that he means to lead them to Rivendell via a hill named Weathertop. So just at this point, Merry comes in from outside saying that the Black Riders are in town. He was outside near Bill Ferny's house when he was overcome by a death-like sleep caused by the black breath, as Aragorn tells him. Merry was only saved by Nob, who's one of Prancing Pony's hobbit staff, running up to save him from the two menacing figures standing over him. So that's shown in the art here. And when Nob gets up to them, the figures have disappeared. But Aragorn warns them not to go to their rooms because they'll be expected to be there, and he will go and get their things. So all of this leads us up into chapter 11 of Lord of the Rings, and the name of this scenario, which is A Knife in the Dark. So Knife in the Dark, the chapter opens with the servants of Mordor attacking Fatty Bolger back in Buckland. So if you recall, Frodo left Fatty there or Frederick Bolger there to make it seem as if he was still in the Shire. And at this point, some of the Black Riders have gone to attack Frodo, expecting him to be there. But Frederick was prepared, and he ran for the house from aid, reaching the Brandybucks, who made the horn call of Buckland, alerting the town and driving off the Black Riders, who rode like a gale to get away. Now that is actually a card, but not in this scenario for some reason, but it does come up in, I think, the previous scenario where they rode like a gale. But regardless, the Black Riders now know that the ring has left the Shire with Frodo. So the hobbits and Aragorn spend the night out of their rooms, and in the morning when they go back in to check the room, it's been tossed, pillows slashed and the mattress torn. Obviously slightly more dramatic in the movies, which was cool, but the same thing happened here in the book. And so the next morning, in a hurry to leave, they come to find that their ponies have been let loose in the night. Now Strider assures them that it won't slow them down, not the path that he was going to take anyway, but he does worry about being able to carry enough supplies. Now Nob goes around town looking for ponies to buy, but only Bill Ferny is willing to sell one, and that is a half-starved pony that he has. One last way to increase his profit from these hobbits coming into town, and that is Bill the pony. So the hobbits, actually Barliman buys the horse on the hobbits' behalf and pays them for the horses that have gone boating, though he does eventually end up with horses that come back or are returned. But the party now set off with the one pony that they have and what they can carry, Sam offering to carry double, because he's a good lad Sam. And they go into the wilds here. So his plan, as far as they could understand it without knowing the country, was to go towards Archet at first, but to bear right and pass it on the east, and then to steer as straight as he could over the wildlands to Weathertop Hill. In that way, the woods, if all went well, cut off a great loop of the road, which further on bent southward to avoid the Midgewater marshes. But of course they would have to pass through the marshes themselves, and Strider's description of them was not encouraging. Anything on the other side? Nothing. Story-wise at least. So they're going to cut through Chetwood Forest, and then in through Midgewater marshes, which no fun to travel through, and eventually by cutting off some of the road head up to Weather Hills, and eventually up all the way to the top of there, Weathertop, to get a good view of kind of what's going on around the place and how they're going to proceed on to Rivendell. So after 5 days of travelling, where they're no sight nor sound of the Black Riders, they do reach Weatherhill and finally up to Weathertop. But from there they espied the Nazgul gathering in the distance. Now unfortunately at this point there was nowhere else they could make it to by the time night drew in, so they chose to stay hidden in a gully near the top of the hill, where other rangers had recently been, but similarly there had also been heavy footsteps, likely those of the Nazgul, ringwraiths there. So because the rangers were kind of mentioned in this one, I've also added in a couple more cards that I can play there, and because it was a stash for them, added in some Dunedain cards, the signal cards, that are relevant to the deck that I'm playing. There are other ones, and that I'll cover a bit more in the deck tech when I'm going to go for the playthrough, but all of this is reasonable to assume that somewhere out there's a Dunedain lookout and somebody hunting. Strider himself mentions that he can go hunting if they're going to get short on food, so it stands to reason that other people are out there. Regardless, as the night falls, the group tell stories to each other, but very soon the Nazgul arrived, and terrifying the hobbits with a hiss that felt like a piercing chill. Now, piercing cries not specifically mentioned until much later in the book, but obviously again the movies has that shriek sound to them that's really distinctive for the Nazgul, and has the same kind of effect here. The hobbits are terrified with that hiss and kind of fall to their knees. So then, I guess theoretically this can go here. As they're coming up, Frodo feels this urge to put on the ring, and he does, at which point you can see them more clearly, but that also drew their attention, and the ringwraiths attack. So Strider has led Frodo and his companions to Weathertop, where he hopes to meet Gandalf. Instead, they find the Black Riders waiting for them. As the sun goes down, the Nazgul close in on their prey. Not sure how true that is. I don't think Gandalf was hoping to meet... Aragorn was hoping to meet Gandalf atop Weathertop, but... whatever, gives you a bit of a theme, right? So there were 5 tall figures, these guys. 2 standing on the lip of the dell, 3 advancing. In their white faces burned keen and merciless eyes. Under their mantles were long grey robes. Upon their grey hairs were helms of silver, and their haggard hands were swords of steel. Their eyes fell on him and pierced him as they rushed towards him. Desperate, he drew his own sword. So they charged towards Frodo, and Frodo fights back, but then feels a pain like poisoned ice in his left shoulder where he was stabbed, and that's off the pale blade. So up here we've got the 4 ringwraiths. If we look at the set aside card, there's 4 ringwraiths, which are not the same as Black Riders. They are and they aren't, but different enemies in this scenario. And the Witch King as well, but this will not be the last that we see of the Witch King. So Frodo gets stabbed, and then the rest of the fight happens kind of off screen at this point. So that's the end of the chapter, and the start of the next chapter. Everything's over. But Frodo is in trouble. His wound is serious, and he needs elvish medicine. But he has to get to the elves in time before the Morgul blade does its work. So Morgul traded pale blade there. And their haggard hands are swords of steel. So I'll cover more of the deck tech in the playthrough video. That just makes more sense. And if you have been keeping up with the playthrough videos as well, I've now gone back and left a comment about all the mistakes that I made on them, and they are plentiful, so hopefully that helps people. But just as a quick look, a couple of things that you need to get through this scenario are being able to kill Bill Ferny quickly, because you can't optionally engage or fight him, and he raises your threat quite significantly. So here, having Hail of Stones to be able to attack somebody in the staging area is pretty important. A couple of different cards you could use for that. And the Ring Wraiths come back at the end of the scenario, so being able to remove them from the encounter discard pile is quite handy in this quest as well. You'll also see quite a few of the enemies come out, so being able to attack is as good as defense, so that's kind of why that's in there. And this is just a generic location to fit in, that fits in a variety of decks. And then I guess finally a couple of cards that would also fit in here from the story: a Burning Brand, which Aragorn uses to fight off the Nazgul, and Tightener Belts. So as the hobbits are realising they're not going to have quite as much food, they don't have time to go hunting, they can eat berries and fruit off the land, but they'll have to watch what they eat, and as we all know, hobbits love to eat stuff. So that is the story as told through this scenario. The next scenario is the flight to the ford, where we have to get Frodo to the elves to help him before he succumbs to his wounds, and whilst dodging some more ring wraiths, some more Nazgul. So that's it for now. I'll have the playthrough video up probably in a couple of days. But until then, this is Rings Check signing off.